Thank you so much, Sari Solden, for agreeing to be interviewed for the Women's ADHD Empowerment Festival. I've been a huge fan of your work since the beginning of my ADHD diagnosis, and I can hardly believe that right now I'm actually talking to you in person. I actually had like my headphones with your audiobook, really gaining so much knowledge from it. So it's
Great.
been
It's a
really
pleasure to talk to
amazing.
you too. Yes.
Thank you, Sari. Sari Solden is a psychotherapist who has counseled adults with ADHD for over 30 years. And she's the author of the books Women with Attention Deficit Disorder, Journeys Through ADDulthood, and co-author of the Radical Guide for Women with ADHD. Her areas of specialization include women's issues, inattentive ADHD, and the emotional consequences and healing process for adults who grew up with undiagnosed ADHD. So thank you so much, Sari. I would just like to start this conversation by talking about your latest book, the concept around helping women with ADHD. Your approach is very different to many others. It combines the concept of radical acceptance with a minority model of counseling. I get it that this means that you move away from the over focus on symptom elimination as the most important measure of successful treatment. And instead, you help her move towards increased connection, vitality, and ability to contribute to the world in a way that she finds meaningful without the stress of executive function challenges that overwhelm her resources. So can you talk more about this concept that you base your book on?
Well, my book, our book, myself with Dr. Frank, is radical in the sense that, in quotes, that it shouldn't be radical. This idea that instead of trying to fix herself, a woman could simply learn to be herself. So it's a little bit tongue in cheek. And it shouldn't be radical that we're going to consider the person as a whole person and help her move toward having a fulfilling life and a life of achievement and connection instead of spending her whole life trying to fix herself or get over herself. And the book's really about untangling your sense of self that has become so conflated with your brain challenges because women don't get diagnosed early often. That's a natural consequence of that. They don't know who they are and they think that all their difficulties is the way to define themselves or measure themselves. And so my approach though has been growing for 30 years, and my approach comes from that I started out in the field of minority mental health and cross-cultural counseling, and I think that is what's made me different. It influenced me all these years. It didn't come from a neuroscience background. It came more from gender roles, understanding the role of culture and the negative kind of gender role expectations that women internalize, that any minority looks to the culture to see, that they don't measure up often and they internalize a negative view of themselves and continue this negative narrative. And that's really what we wanted to break in this book. We wanted to have women not just stop at the idea of diagnosis and treatment, but then how do you move into what we call the center stage of your own life to develop yourself fully, even though you still have these difficulties. So when we talk about untangling, and I think this is part of radical acceptance, that we talk about moving on two tracks, really, like there's your chronic difficulties, there's your brain, that's where you use medication, organizing tips and tools and strategies. And that's your brain, that's your chronic struggle, and it's very difficult. But that's not who you are. And we want to untangle that from your sense of self. And so to walk alongside those two different parallel paths is really what we're saying. I could talk about radical acceptance for a second if you want me to, or you want to.
I'm especially interested in how you can guide somebody to accept the struggles that they have, because the point of getting an ADHD diagnosis for many women is to get the medication, and to eliminate those symptoms, to get better from those symptoms.
Yes.
So
That's true. That's, you want any chronic struggle, any chronic condition is a chronic condition. You want to make things easier for yourself. The point is to help your symptoms through medication, or it's very difficult to live with ADHD. So acceptance doesn't mean just being resigned or passive or just living with something. It means not mixing that up with who you are. And what women do is wait to get fixed. And as we say in our book, only dogs and furniture need to get fixed. That the biggest mistake women have, they come to see me at all different ages, all the way to 80, 85, is that they've been waiting their whole life to get over this before they let themselves move toward having a fulfilling life. And that's what we want to stop. So you work on your brain, you get yourself help, but that's not all of who you are. And when I talk about a whole woman, we talk about you have strengths, you have challenges, and you also have your core sense of your core characteristics, who you are as a person. You're funny, you're interesting, you're sensitive, whoever you are, that's what's going to make the difference. And so it's not just even just a strength-based approach, it's a whole person approach.
It's a
Radical
holistic.
acceptance. Oh, let me just say for a second, like radical acceptance, when I heard like acceptance commitment therapy, DBT, and even go back to Buddhist roots, really, that this means there's a difference between pain and suffering, is basically what is a hard concept and a lifelong concept to practice and work toward. That there's your pain of your chronic difficulties. What turns into suffering for women and shame and is this disavowing who you are and hating it and fearing it and pushing it away. And that's what causes much more pain than living with ADHD. And so that's why I call it a radical acceptance approach, because, and it's a lifelong approach. Acceptance is a very active, lifelong practice. It's not something like, okay, I've got it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about learning to live with the difficulties, managing it, but not letting that stop your life.
That's right. And through counseling so many women with ADHD in the last 30 years, you've helped women come to terms with seeing themselves as a sum of their struggles and their strengths. So as a whole, a holistic approach rather than needing to eliminate her symptoms entirely. Well, what would you advise a woman with ADHD to, you know, look back in their life and, say if they want to have a conversation with their younger self, what should they say to that younger person?
Oh, yeah, that was an interesting question. Let's see, I did write down that answer. Let's see. Now I just have to find it. Um, well, it was very interesting because, first of all, don't give up your hope and dreams. They think that women, as they grow up and they just get more and more involved with these difficulties, because they don't understand them usually. It's understandable why their whole life becomes getting over this and trying to solve a mystery that they don't understand. But if you could look back to, don't let go of your hopes and dreams just because you have these difficulties. Find something that really resonates with you, that you want to do, and know though that you will have difficulties whatever you choose, that you're going to need some accommodations, but the accommodations or help should be in the service of you and yourself and your life, not to just get organized for its own sake, but to help you keep growing. So you don't want to, if younger self, you don't want to accept toxic relationships. You don't want to give up power in relationships because you collude with this negative view of others about yourself. This is what women do. You have to keep um, equality and respect in relationships, even though you have difficulties. And that's going to often take some counseling or coaching or being with other women to hear that, so you can get validated that you're a whole valuable person, even if you have difficulties with these kind of executive function roles. And you're going to work toward a career that you love, but you're going to maybe have to tweak it a little bit more. You're going to, not just what you want to do, but what kind of environment you want to work in. Do you want to work alone? Do you do better with a partner? Do you better, having an assistant, or do you want to work in a corporation? You have to know, like, really more specifically how your brain operates well. So really knowing your brain.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And, the fact that as kids growing up with ADHD, you internalize a lot of negative messages about yourself, and your sense of self might become a bit distorted. The awareness isn't completely there because you grew up listening to others saying things about yourself. And it is such a touching thing that you've mentioned about the messages that a younger person should think and speak to themselves.
Right. And we get it from the culture too. We don't get it just, my first book, I talk about she messages. We don't just get mean messages from the people in our family always. It's just we hear how people describe other women with these difficulties, and then we sort of stay in the closet, or we pretend, or we hide, we pass for normal. So, you're absorbing negative messages from the culture a lot. And that's why I say that it's important to examine how you feel about differences. I talk about neurodiversity. It's the same as diversity. You have to value differences and be around other people who can actually see you and value you. And they don't all have to have ADHD, but finding people who can really honor who you are as a whole person and hang around them more than other people for a while.
That sounds amazing. We all try to find those positive people, in our lives. And I think because as women with ADHD, we need that more than anything, right?
Right, and we could start with people with ADHD, but then you can also, move on to then people who are adventurous or sensitive or creative, or other people who are like you too, and just keep developing, slowly moving ahead, and stretching these edges of your comfort zone to get some new experiences of success for yourself.
Yeah. So when you talked about how women with ADHD do not really have that clear self-awareness, I wondered what you think. How does a woman know what her true thoughts are and not those that are influenced by others?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I remember being much younger, and I could understand what everybody was thinking. I said, "Oh, that sounds good. Oh, that sounds good. Oh, that sounds good." And so I think that we have a lot of strengths that we've turned into negatives, and we can flip those around. So women are always told, "Oh, you're too sensitive," or you're thinking too big," or all those things can be used in a positive way. And so I think we've learned to push away these special qualities that make us confused about trusting ourselves. Plus, we don't know what's going on with us, so we've learned to not trust ourselves. We've often been told, "Oh, you're too much," or "You're too different." So I think part of the therapeutic process is understanding we have some special ways of viewing the world, special perspectives, and so we have to trust those more. And it's going to take a while, and you have to process out loud, like we're doing now. Process out loud with someone else who can see you and help you figure out really what you value and who you are, because it takes a while to feel like you're even entitled to know what you want. And part of that radical acceptance we talk about is like, if you don't accept your whole self, you're going to push away all your information and good things too. You have to block out everything to disavow anything. So if you can allow yourself to feel whatever you feel about the disorder or the clutter or the difficulties, those are really hard things. But if you just try to push them away, you'll be blocked from even the information and emotions that help you make good decisions.
Yeah, and I think like that is why also coaching is so important as well, because then there is this alternative perception of you, that you haven't really talked about enough. Like a coach can actually empower you and sort of champion the positive sides to you, that you may not necessarily see because you haven't actually gone there yet.
Right, you can't do this alone. You have to have somebody else who can see you and value you, and not just give you a negative lens through
Yeah.
which to view yourself. You have to expand. Women do have this distorted lens because they're seeing themselves in this, very narrow way about their difficulties. And so, whoever can help you expand that and help you move toward your own meaningful goals is what's going to make a big difference to you.
Okay. And as a woman with ADHD who are beginning to journey towards self acceptance after her ADHD diagnosis, how would she set meaningful goals for herself to move
Like,
forward?
yeah, exactly. I think you mentioned like coaching or counseling, first of all, to do it with someone else. But I wrote my second book, Journeys for Adulthood, was about finding a new identity after it's out on tape for the first time, out on audiobook for the first time, because it's very important. There's this middle ground between understanding your brain and before you can get out there and do that in relationships or in the world, where you have to form a new identity and integrate these new ideas about yourself. And I always advise people, I think even in this last book, about to notice like what you resonate with. Let yourself sort of feel either pangs of longing. Like I remember when I was younger, I would covet these speaker badges at conferences. Instead of getting depressed about it, I learned to say, "Oh, that must mean that I want to move in that direction." Or I would see people broadcasting on TV. I could feel bad. And I say, oh, maybe that means that there's part of me that wants to do that. So if you have pangs when you talk to people or hear other careers, or you see other kinds of relationships, let that inform you. So let yourself be open to what you resonate with and what sparks you. It could be sort of a roadmap to what you want. And, being with other women with ADHD is really important too, because that's very powerful. I've noticed that women hear other women who have the same struggles as they do, but they also can see more easily that those women are smart or creative or strong women. And then it forces you to sort of shift your own self-image. So being with finding your own tribe, as we say, and then just taking small steps. Like I said before, just push. If you can't do something, it means it's too big a step. Something very, very small, like if you want to take a class or something, just, let yourself turn on the computer first, or let yourself just look at a website first. Don't push yourself too much. But if you can start moving a little bit in a way that feels comfortable, but pushing yourself a little bit toward, you start a new feedback loop, a new cycle of success, where if you get a little bit more information about yourself, you feel a little bit more boosted to take another step. But you have to, and then you'll learn, some things won't be the right things for you. Some things might need more accommodation. We talk in this book about many women. It's so sad. They're very highly skilled, or have great strengths that are actually recognized in companies or through organizations. They turn down opportunities a lot because they think, well, I don't know how to do a mailing list, or I won't be able to take notes, or all these other things that are not the core of who they are. They have to learn to ask for help and to be able to say that they need this other piece accommodated, so they don't have to just keep turning things down. There's going to be difficulties with ADHD, and you're going to have to, that part of the acceptance is feeling strong enough to say when you need help.
Yeah, I like what you say about, starting that baby step first before you dive in, because
Yeah.
most often we have problems with initiation, and
Yeah,
looking at the,
sometimes it means it's too big a step, because with ADHD, you have a lot of fears. Sometimes it's ADHD, you don't know where something is, you don't want to ask for something again, but often it's like the embarrassment or the shame or of the of letting people know that you've had difficulty. So just going slowly and asking for help.
yeah. Also, another question, which is more biological. So we've
Mhm.
heard that hormones greatly affect, a girl or a woman's ADHD symptoms. How can we put strategies in place to help a woman with ADHD work around the challenges caused by hormonal changes?
Right. Well, again, of course, if you can work with a doctor on anything biological, that's fine. If sometimes people even increase medication if there's something, a certain time of month that always uh, comes up, you can work psychopharmacologically, but also just knowing, just like anything else about your brain, knowing, okay, this is a time of the month, for instance, or a time of my life where things are going to get more challenging. So first of all, you don't scare yourself. A lot of people, oh, everything's going well, then oh, everything's not going well. And if you know that it's hormonally based, because that affects your neurotransmitters, then you won't get scared, first of all, and you won't start berating yourself and feeling anxious, which just causes more of a problem. You also won't set yourself up by, oh, okay, if you know that things go wrong every time, at this time of month or this time of your life, uh, you won't set things up in a way where you don't have enough support, or you schedule too much, or you can learn how you work well during times where you're hormonally challenged, and again set up your life during those times in a way that reflects that you know how you operate well and when you don't. So again, a lot of this is knowing how your brain operates well and trying to set it up in a much more nuanced way. So
Yeah.
just knowing yourself biologically and emotionally.
So it's a lot about awareness and also self-acceptance and restructuring your life to suit as well.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah. So with regards to executive dysfunction, living with ADHD also poses some challenges around communication. So how would someone with ADHD work around their issues with communicating their own value and advocating for themselves if they're
Mhm.
riddled with self-doubt?
Yeah, well, hopefully, you're going to be working on the self-doubt part through all the things we just talked about. But communication is the way that it actually manifests in the world. People take their cues from you, I always tell people. So if you're feeling more accepting of yourself, if you know yourself, like we've talked about, if you know how you operate well, if you feel confident enough because you've taken some small steps or gotten support, it's going to be easier for you to communicate directly about what you want. And most women in general, let alone women with ADHD, have trouble being direct and asking for what they want, letting people know what they want. And when you've grown up with ADHD, you feel very vulnerable about that. So you hide and you pretend, and then people don't understand really what you want because you're afraid to ask for it. Women with ADHD also uh, have a trouble culturally based issues like, I don't know how it is over there, but here, all women learn to be nice, to not make trouble for other people, to not make waves. And so women with ADHD have to ask for special accommodations often. And then that just plays into this thing about people pleasing, and they don't want to ask for it. I've had a lot of clients who had doors even to their office that they could close, but they felt, oh no, that would be sending a wrong message. People would think I wasn't friendly, or people are afraid to ask for what they need. So be aware that when things are maybe culturally gendered based, when you're running into a barrier like that. Um, but I have models in some of my books about communication, about their strength based. You want to, uh, first of all, you want to describe what's difficult for you instead of characterize yourself. You don't want to put yourself down or apologize all the time. So you don't want to say, or you don't even have to disclose. You don't have to say, oh, I have ADD, I can't do this. You say, hey, I have difficulty, you know, listening to what you're saying. It's really important to me what you're saying in this meeting, but it's pretty crowded. Could we step outside? Or it's really important to me, that we work well together. Can we schedule something? So validating the importance of the other person without pretending, and knowing solutions that will work for yourself. I really have a little bit of difficulty, remembering what you're saying when you're telling me these directions. Could we write them down? You come up with the things, and describe you have difficulties, but coming from a strength-based approach about yourself. Like, I really get involved in my ideas, so I might lose track of the time. Could you come and get me, before the meeting? Learning to talk like that, whole person communication. So your strength, your struggles, and then validating the other person, and asking for what you need and figuring that out in advance. Um, yeah, the last thing is really boundaries, or like what you're talking about with communication, is setting boundaries in your personal life or people you work with. And because women often, they just allow themselves to be treated, in a negative way, because they feel like, oh, their ADD so bad, so they collude with some negative view. It's usually often coming from the women themselves, responding to toxic messages. So really, through therapy or through other women, learning to respect yourself, and expect mutual respect in a relationship. And that takes a long time to get to that. But these things, your ADD challenges, don't mean you're not valuable in a relationship. It means you might be contributing in different ways, even if you're not good at executive function.
Yeah, I think what you say was exactly right. Like, past experiences really dictate how, we feel about conversations. And one of my followers actually told me that past experience have made her feel anxious and misunderstood. And as a result, she doesn't speak up much anymore. And, that's really sad, because women with ADHD have so many brilliant ideas. We are idea machines, and we really need to get it out into the world.
Right. And women have learned to, that ADHD is like, I tell people, if you're only dealing with ADHD at the end of this whole thing, that's good, because it's all the other stuff, the shame, the hiding, the pretending, the avoiding, all that stuff is what's much more of a problem for women with ADHD, because, that if it was as easy as just looking up some tips and tools and strategies, nobody would have a problem. But in therapy, you see just the layers and layers of shame, and hiding and fear that women have developed because they weren't diagnosed often, and then they have no idea. It takes a long time to unravel those things and untangle those things.
Yeah, you're right. No, so this is so interesting for me, and also very validating, because I'm launching a communication coaching program to help other women with ADHD and other neurodiverse conditions to overcome their self-doubt and to advocate for themselves so that they can get paid, what they deserve in their career. Because one of the side effects of having communication barrier is that we often don't go for the career that we want, and, suffer with the financial stability as a result. So
Exactly. No, so we have some ideas, in the book, just for all women, and especially for women with ADHD, and radical guide about how you present yourself and how you cannot, send off that apology kind of vibe when you're talking to other people. But in my book Journeys, and maybe I'll share it with you off screen, I have a model for communication that really has an easy way to remember, like an acronym about how to approach these issues. So yeah, communication is how finally all this work that you're doing is going to come out into the world and get you what you need, and set boundaries and protect yourself in healthy ways.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I'd really be interested to have a follow-up
Yeah,
chat on this.
sure.
Also, the questions that I initially sent to you, has been completed, but I have got even more questions
Uh-oh.
from from my followers today. So people are so
Imagine that
excited
from
about
a
this.
woman with ADHD,
Oh,
right? More questions.
yeah, they're so excited about this. And one of them has asked me, how do we overcome or manage hypersensitivity?
Like I said before, sometimes, I think you should turn it around and use it as a strength. Become a therapist, become a writer. I mean, we were always told, my clients were always told, oh, you're too sensitive. And that just means you're just making this up, or so I think, first of all, well, there's two parts. First of all, understanding sensitivity can work in your favor if you really hone it. It means you're empathetic. I mean, you have a lot to give, or a way to understand the world. And then you have to the other part of it is you've been wounded or traumatized by growing up with ADHD. So it's natural that you're going to react very, you might get hurt very often. And I think it's important to be mindful as part of this radical acceptance approach. When you're wounded or you're feeling bad, just to be able to notice it and understand it. It's not going to go away. Like, you might go into a group of people and you might feel different than they, and they might start to feel like you don't fit in. And all these old feelings of invisibility or feeling down, all those things might come up again. And you have to say, hey, all these feelings are coming up again. I think that's related to, what I went through or what I've absorbed. And like I said, don't push them away or don't pretend they're not there. Just sit with them and they'll usually pass after a while. So it's by accepting, like, you have been wounded and hurt and you've gone through a lot growing up with these kind of invisible differences. And so just not absorbing them, but just letting them be and understanding them, and knowing you have had a lot of wounds from these kinds of experiences without understanding them. You didn't have anybody explaining them to you growing up. And uh, so I think that it's natural to feel wounded easily and be sensitive, but then start to use it to help other people and be empathetic to other people, or write about your feelings. And then to learn the third thing is, then when you're sensitive, to learn to protect yourself. Boundaries are the way we feel safe in relationships. So being able to, uh, instead of being just defended and running away from it, setting boundaries about how people can talk to you and how they can treat you and what you need. That's a way to feel safe too, and to protect yourself from just being out there completely vulnerable in the world. Yeah, that's going to be hard.
That's incredible, Sari. I, I just wondered whilst you're saying this, whether if one of my follower who has this problem with hypersensitivity, and you have acutely observed and said the right thing, which is, she has had trauma in her past lives. If she were to reach out to you, how would she do it? Would it be through your psychotherapy practice, or,
We're
as
trying to set boundaries right now. I mean, there's a million people contacting me. So I'm thinking of doing more and more bigger groups now that I'm on Zoom all the time, because there's so many people, I can't help them all individually anymore.
yeah,
Uh,
I
but
could
I do
imagine.
have great colleagues. If she's in the UK, for instance,
She's
I
in the
have a,
US.
oh, she is in the US. Yeah. Well, people can always write me at Sari@SariSolden.com. I try to, if I can't see them for a consultation, I try to find, I have a network,
Okay,
of people,
sure.
but I am trying to do more and more workshops online, so I can talk to more people, because
That's amazing.
the pandemic has really opened up a lot of ways for us to communicate, but also more people's awareness.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And it's incredible that you're reaching such a global scale of people as well
Yeah.
that you can help. And
Seems like a second wave. I mean, I was in Europe, 30 years ago with my first book. There was a big excitement. I have books translated into many countries. I've been all over Europe many times, but now there's like a second wave of young people, it seems like, who are getting which is great, of women. They're from all over the world. So I can tell there's a lot of new generation of women that are understanding this now.
Yes, and along with the new generation of women are also people who have children, so women who are newly diagnosed are also wondering what to look out for in their
Yeah.
children. And one of my followers asked, how early can we observe symptoms in our daughters and what age is appropriate to assess?
Right. There's a great book, Understanding Girls with ADHD, by a friend of mine, Ellen Littman, with other co-authors, who really goes through every age very beautifully and distinctly. I mean, I think there's a tendency to worry that your daughter's gonna have ADHD if you do, and so you want to be watchful, but you don't want to over diagnose something. And I think it's great though, because if you're aware of this early, your daughter won't grow up not understanding her difficulty. You can really model, that we have these differences and that's not who we are, and this is what I do for support. And so they're looking to you all the time for how you're handling your own difficulties. But I mean, by the time they get into school, you'll see it. I mean, sometimes you'll see hypersensitivity early on. If there's like girls, it's hard to diagnose. So if your daughter is really smart, or you have a lot of structure for her, a lot of support, sometimes it's masked. So you have to understand that if she might look okay on the outside, but if she's developing a lot of perfectionism and people pleasing, and then eventually spending more and more time during her work, or getting very triggered easily, you have to really watch it, because it might not just come out like hyperactive little boys. So you have to notice, like, when things get complicated, like in a certain grade, you have to make more changes or transitions. Here it's like they're in the fourth grade, where you have to do more reporting, or when things start getting a little bit more complicated. Also, obviously her room, her belongings, her stuff, if she's chronically having this disorganization, instead of just saying, go clean your room, really notice, is she having trouble with more than other kids, prioritizing, categorizing, knowing how to organize, knowing how to put things away. I mean, what's hard for little girls is they're expected to do things that they have no idea they want to do, and they can't do it. So I think you are in great positions when you've been diagnosed at your age to help your
Right.
daughters.
Yeah. I have just had a conversation with my daughter's teacher today, just before I spoke to you, and it's so empowering to be able to tell her that it is a learning difference.
It's so amazing. Young people your age, I've noticed, are much more able and willing, maybe because you have a generation that is much more accepting of differences in general, that you're much more able, I've noticed, to say what you say about this, that there's differences and it's not about character, and that people need help. And older generations had a harder time with that. So it sounds like you're being a great advocate for your daughter.
Yeah, I think it takes time as well to reach there. And also, I think I feel braver as well because, there is a general wave, a revolution around the perception of ADHD at the moment. You know,
Really.
I feel there is maybe more around the people who have been diagnosed. And, with the neurotypicals, not so much, but on social media, I think we're 10 years ahead of anyone in real life, I think.
That's amazing. I mean, we never even had that notion of neurodiversity or neurotypicality. I mean, that's why I talk about that. I'd like to talk about things in terms of neurodiversity instead of ADHD for women. It's very meaningless, I think, and it's very broad based. Neurodiversity means you just have differences in the way you think and the way you process and the way you organize. And so it's much more, helpful, I think, instead of some ADHD label that's stereotypical.
Yeah, that's right. And another question is, I think they might have something in their mind, but it's, what do you think, apart from what we know, the symptoms that we know about ADHD, are there any other lesser known symptoms, especially in women?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of lesser known symptoms. That's what I talked about in my first book, because you used to always think about it so hyperactive, impulsive, trouble causing. It's completely opposite for women, especially women who are inattentive. I mean, that's even inattentive men, it's hard to see, but inattentive women, it's easy to misunderstand that as depression. And when often, at some point, it could be depression too, but at some point, their depression is caused often by undiagnosed executive function or ADHD problems. And so, of course, you're going to wind up depressed. They look they can look so much alike that it's very difficult to get a correct diagnosis at some point when you are depressed or you look depressed, and when you can't get off the couch, or you're, more of a couch potato, more of, paralyzed, not figuring out what to do, not making decisions. For women with ADHD, it's much more about, the TMS, like I say in my book, time, money, and stuff, instead of PMS, really the clutter, the disorganization, the not being able to manage the logistics of your household or your personal life or your friendships, or, women carry so many of these multiple roles that for women, I think it's much more a feeling of overwhelm in your daily life than you see described.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sari. Also, another question. I think it's the last one now. This is the last one now. Because
Oh, they're great questions.
I have come across really brilliant people who have both ADHD and autism. One of my followers is curious about the relationship between ADHD and autism. What is the link as far
Yeah,
as?
I mean, I can't tell you exactly. I mean, for a long time now, some people have described it as on the spectrum, that ADHD, there's just a wide, I see it just as neurodiversity in general. And some people, it's hard to completely, for some people, tease these out. If somebody's just got characteristics of both, I think there's so many overlaps of communication difficulties sometimes, or social difficulties. Maybe they're caused by different things. There's a great book called Different Minds by Deidre Lovecki that really analyzes in depth gifted kids with Asperger's or with autism or with ADHD or inattentive. So it's you have to go to somebody who's an expert to help you tease that out. But so I can't really tell you that, except that they're often very closely related. Sometimes it's easy to see. I can't, everybody's so, I just believe everybody is, these labels, keep us in these boxes, but each person really is just so complex, and so many different ways that each person processes, that I personally don't like to just, give you big boxes to put people in. Because it's better to view people as a human being with, and describe the way they operate and their difficulties, and then, get the right medication for the right difficulty and the right definition to identify with the right group of people to help move ahead. But I personally, like to move away from that pathologizing model and really look at, who is this person? Does he have this difficulty, this difficulty? And so lately, I'm much more wanting just to talk about the person versus the
Yeah.
label or pathology.
Yeah,
Although I'm not saying you shouldn't go get diagnosed, but I'm saying it's hard just to make those blanket.
sure. Yeah, at the end of the day, we're all human beings,
There you go.
minds and different evolution pace, so it's
Yeah, so I think neurodiversity is just like, diversity of any type, whether it's a disability or whether it's any kind of difference. I coined these terms for different talks, which I love. I talked about neuro bigotry and neuro profiling. When I was talking about the confluence of, the between diversity and neurodiversity, because I think we are neuro profiled sometimes when we have ADHD. Some people, sometimes it's invisible, but when people see your difficulties, they can sort of profile you and think, oh, they're spacey, or they're disorganized, or they shouldn't be in this job, or that, or they're not valuable. So there's that neuro bigotry, I think, that exists for wherever you are on that spectrum, whether it's autism or more on the ADHD spectrum. So I think bottom line is we're all human beings, and the more we can see each other as human beings for a variety of issues in the world today, I think that's where I'll leave it.
yeah. Thank you so much, Sari. It's been a really illuminating conversation,
Oh, it's
and
been fun.
I feel like my brain has swelled up twice the size, just by listening and speaking to you. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you for
Um,
doing this Empowerment Festival, and for all the work you do.